Welcome to an SFB Addict video. Are you about to be a Windows refugee? Are you still running Windows 95 XP or Windows 7? Well, Windows 7 has expired, as has Windows Vista and Windows XP. So you're going to need a different operating system on your computer if you want to continue to browse the internet in a secure and safe way. Because the updates that would normally keep your operating system safe are no longer going to be given to you by Microsoft. So what are you going to do? Are you going to buy a new computer, or are you going to try and get more life out of the computer you currently have? Well, if you're going to try and get more life out of the computer you already have, one of the things that you can try as an alternative to Windows is Linux. Now, Linux can be a bit scary to the Windows refugee. It really all depends on your level of experience. But for most people, the operating system really isn't all that important. It's all about the programs you use. So the real question you should be asking is there a Linux equivalent of the Windows software that I use? So write down a list of the Windows programs that you rely on, and then take a look at sites like one of these three sites, which can show you what the equivalent Linux software would be for the software that you are used to using. So when it comes to things like Microsoft Office programs, there are Linux equivalents that are free, by the way, like OpenOffice, LibreOffice, KOffice, SAGOffice. Specifically in those Office programs, there are things like Word programs. So if you're used to using Microsoft Word, there is LibreOffice Word, OO Writer, KWord, LaTeX, etc. If you're used to using little Windows notepads or WordPads, there are dozens of Linux equivalents for that. You've got kwrite and gedit are probably the most common ones. You'll see G for a GNOME derivative, or you'll see K, which stands for KDE. Those are the two most common desktops for Linux. But it goes on and on. You've got equivalents for Excel, like Lotus, Quattro Pro, PowerPoint, project managers, email programs like Outlook. A common one is Thunderbird. And the list goes on and on and on. So just take a quick look at what you use the most and see if there is a Linux equivalent. And you'll be pleasantly surprised that there usually is. Adobe Photoshop. There is an equivalent called GIMP. There's another one called Blender. Another one called Inkscape. Winamp. There's Amarok, Atunes, Rhythmbox, Clementine. Here on the Linux Alternative Project page, it's a similar type of list. So for Adobe Acrobat Reader, there's ePDFU, Ocular, XPDF, etc. Adobe Audition, Audacity would be the Linux equivalent. AOL Instant Messenger. Pigeon is a messaging program for Linux. But pretty much any type of program that you can think of, there is usually some kind of Linux equivalent. Now, Linux in the old days was command line. That's not the case anymore. It's a full-fledged operating system just like Windows XP. It operates with a graphic user interface and a desktop, etc., with variations on that theme. And finally a third website here. So for web browsers, you're probably used to Internet Explorer or Opera, Firefox. Well, they got Firefox, Chromium, Opera for Linux. Email clients. Evolution is almost an Office suite email program. Thunderbird, etc. Lots of alternatives. There's news readers. There are FTP programs. IRC clients. Instant messaging programs. Video, audio conference programs. There are firewall programs. So pretty much anything you can think of, there is a Linux equivalent to it. Yes, there are even antivirus programs. Now, with Linux, you don't need to worry about viruses as much as you used to under Windows. More often than not, these antivirus programs are going to be scanning common files that are used between computers, like movie files and music files and documents that you may share with a Windows user. And more often than not, they'll be looking for a Windows-based virus. Those are going to be more common. It's mostly to protect your Windows friends, just in case they're passing around a virus kind of thing. Multimedia equivalents, music MP3 players, M-Player, VLC are kind of the big ones for Linux. There are programs for CD and DVD burning and ripping, MIDI players, radio players, audio editors, sound editors, etc., etc., etc. The list just keeps going on and on and on. Flash players, flash creation. So if you come across a program, so draw SWF, whatever particular distribution of Linux you're using will have some kind of a software manager where you can look for a program in particular. If it doesn't have that specific program for your distribution, you can look under general categories and see what is specifically available. And there are other ways of installing software other than just the software manager. The software manager is the easiest way of doing things, but you can manually install software directly. But anyway, 3D graphics programs, lots of them, and almost all of them are free. That's another big thing that you're going to find with Linux, is most of your software is going to be available for free. Doesn't mean there isn't commercial software available. There is, but most of what you're going to want or look for will have a free version available. Back to business software, word processors, spreadsheets, graphing. You'll also notice this a lot, where you're used to like 1, 2, or 3 programs in Windows. You'll have like 8 or 9 or 10 versions available in Linux. Personal finances, the Windows MS Money and Quicken or Money Dance. You've got GNU Cash, GNU Fin, KMy Money, Grisby, Money Dance, available for Linux. This is where most people complain the most about Linux is when it comes to games, because you can't play your Windows games on Linux. Well, gee, you're not expecting to play your Macintosh games on Windows, are you? They're different operating systems. Linux does have games, and there are some pretty basic equivalents to some of the pretty basic Windows games. And again, a lot of these are free, if not most of them. And yes, there is professional paid game programs available, but you're just not going to get the bleeding edge games that are available for Windows, because those games are released for the Windows platform. Just like you're not going to be able to play a Sony game on an Xbox or an Xbox on a Sony unless that game company has released a version for each platform. Same thing goes with Linux. But these are older games, and there are Linux equivalents of them. And when you get into programming, you just can't beat Linux. And then you get more of the specialized programs like servers and science programs. Again, you're going to find a lot available for Linux that you would have had to pay through the nose for on Windows. That'll be available for free. Now, how are you going to install your software? I'm not going to go into that in this video. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of videos on YouTube that you can look up on how to install Linux, and you can scroll through and get lots of help here. So even before you want to try and do this on your own machine, you can watch a dozen or so videos that'll show you how to do it. Now, of course, before you install Linux, you need to get Linux. So you need to choose a distro. So if you're completely lost, there are online forums and discussion boards and bulletin boards where you can ask for help. You can even ask your local computer club for assistance, and they can help you out. But you can also, again, use YouTube and other sites like that to search Linux distros and actually get an idea of what are the best Linux distros out there, what a specific distro is like. And there's dozens and dozens and dozens of videos out here that will show you what an operating system is like even before you choose it and install it. Now, the big website is distrowatch.com, and if you go to major distributions, you'll see what the most popular distributions are. And of course, the primary one that's here that we're going to look at is Linux Mint. Linux Mint has been made popular by Windows refugees. So the first one we have here that's been made popular by the massive numbers of Windows refugees coming over to Linux is Linux Mint. It seems to be the one that most Windows users seem to be most comfortable with, and operates in a manner similar to Windows. The second most popular is Ubuntu. Now, Linux Mint is actually built upon Ubuntu, but it offers you some additional customization. And the third most popular is Debian, which Ubuntu is actually built on. And there's others like Mageia, Fedora, etc. And those are the major distributions. And of course, you can always just do some searches on general Linux help. So, lots of videos on general Linux stuff that you can look up, peruse, get a little bit more familiar with it, even before you get into it. But One of the most popular distributions is Linux Mint. They do have a dedicated board where you can go for help on specific software problems, etc. Now, other than the dedicated boards, there's also generalized help from sites like Reddit, and Linux Noobs is a popular one. And if you look at the sidebar here, there's lots of other conversational topics and sections to do with Linux and particular versions of Linux, Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Debian, Arch Linux, OpenSUSE, Slackware, etc. So whatever particular version you want to get help with, it's probably there. Now, there are some rather unique versions of Linux out there, like Puppy Linux. Puppy Linux is mainly for really, really old hardware that most people would have sent to the scrap pile. Puppy Linux can get that hardware up and running and doing things that it wasn't even capable of doing under Windows 95 and Windows 98. You'll be able to do an amazing amount of work with really old hardware via Puppy Linux. Now, Puppy Linux is going to look rather Windows 95-ish, and it's going to use programs that you've never heard the names of before in a lot of cases, but they've done that in order to make Puppy Linux incredibly small. Puppy Linux can actually load into RAM and run entirely from RAM. In other words, you don't even need a hard disk. Now, it's nice to have a hard disk, but it's not necessary with Puppy Linux. So Puppy Linux will have an older kind of style look to it, but it's actually a better look than the original Windows 95 icons. But it's an interesting distribution. Now let's just take a quick look here. And you'll see on YouTube there's lots of videos that you can look up to find out more about Puppy Linux. So if you've got really ancient, decrepit hardware that was Windows 95 and Windows 98 era, this is probably where you're going to want to start, is something like Puppy Linux. And then as you move to the Windows XPs, Windows Vistas, and Windows 7 machines, you're going to probably want something more along the lines of Linux Mint. If it's older hardware, I would recommend XFCE Linux Mint. It'll have less system overhead. Now you could do a GNOME Linux Mint or a KDE Linux Mint, a Mate Linux Mint, a Cinnamon Linux Mint, but those are going to be more modern desktop environments that are going to use more system resources. It'll use more RAM, you'll need a faster processor, etc. So when you're deciding on the desktop environment, just keep in mind the age of the hardware that you have, and if you are older hardware, 95, 98 era, go for something tiny and simple like Puppy Linux. If you are Windows XP machines, go for an XFCE desktop. And only if you are a Windows 7 or Windows 8 machine would you go for something like Cinnamon or Mate or KDE, because it's going to be more modern hardware with faster processors and more RAM. Now when it comes to Windows games, you can use some of your existing Windows games in Linux. This is my little ancient games program launcher. So I've actually got in my launcher old games set up to launch. For instance, this is a DOS box game called Warlords, and you can run your old DOS games. Nice fun time. You can run some of the more modern ones like Alpha Centauri. I shouldn't say more modern, it's more modern than the DOS games. I won't launch this one because it'll black the screen, but Alpha Centauri will run. You can run old DOS games like Populous, Storm Across Europe, You can run Windows 98 and XP type games like Lux, which is Risk. You can even do the old Space Cadet pinball game under Wine. So if you're missing those sounds of that ancient game, you can play them through Wine. And then you have games that were built specifically for Linux, like Zaz. And Zaz is a match the color balls puzzle type game, very common. The most popular, well-known version would probably be something like Zuma. Zaz is the Linux kind of version of Zuma. And then you have other games like Flobo Puyo, which is kind of like a head-to-head Tetris competition kind of thing. And then you've got games like X-Gammon, or Backgammon. You've got other Wine games like Hoyle puzzle games that'll run under Wine, and you've got card games like Isle Riot, where you can do dozens of types of games from Free Cell to Spider. You can just go in and do the select game, and there's a whole large, long list of card games here that you can select from. And then you have games like Mahjong, or K-Mahjong, basic tile solving games. And you get things like Jeweled, which is again a match the diamond, or match the piece puzzle game. And then you got other Linux games like Maelstrom. Which is basically an asteroids game. And then you get things like Vassal. Vassal is a Java client where you can, it's a free client. You can get about 1,800 plus board and card games that are free. So you just launch up the Vassal client. After you've downloaded the individual modules that you want, you can then play those modules. So there's lots of old ones like Stratego and Monopoly and Risk, and then there's other newer ones like Battlestar Galactica or Starfleet Battles, Cadet Module, and hundreds of other games. Vassal Engine is the website where you can get the client. And then there's literally 1,800 plus modules, and they're all in here and they're sorted alphabetically. And pretty much anything you can think of is in here. Attack of the Mutants, Attack Sub, Twilight in the East, Germany at War, etc., etc. Aliens, Ancients, Anzio, etc., etc., etc. Tons and tons of games. And if you go to the software manager, there are dozens of other emulators out there that are also available. So if you wanted to do Steam games, there's a Steam launcher. If you go under specific emulation, there's Wine, Plain Linux, DOSBox, SNES, MAME, Atari, DOS emulators, Atari 800, and there are others. So if you want to play games, there are games available. and you can even do the web browser-based games. But Linux is not going to give you the latest and greatest Windows-based games. For that, you need a Windows platform, so don't expect that. But you do have a tremendous library of older style games that you can play on Linux. Probably more games than you already own. So again, if you want to revitalize your old hardware when Windows 7 and Windows 8 support goes away, you can do that with Linux. Most of the software that you're familiar with under Windows does have a Linux equivalent, and yes, there is a library of games that you can use. So, Linux can be a viable alternative to Windows for those of you that do not have the most up-to-date operating system for Windows and may not be in a position to purchase it. So instead of continuing to use an operating system that is not safe to use on the internet because you no longer have the security updates for it, use something safe and secure like Linux. It's free. And if you yourself don't have the technical skills to install it, you can get help. There are local computer clubs that will be more than willing to help you out with this sort of thing. There's dozens of resources online through Yahoo, YouTube, bulletin boards, Reddit, general Google search engine even, where you can get the information and help you need to know how to install on your computer. So don't be afraid, try it out. Worst case scenario, if you try it out and you don't like it, you can go ahead and buy your new Windows 10 computer. So, SFB Addict signing off. Have fun.